Dispatches, a collection of opinion and analysis from the briefing. Delighted to be with you. As we in the state of Minnesota began to understand the nature of the pandemic, the governor quickly put some parameters in place through executive orders to try to control the spread. One of those, of course, closed bars and restaurants and retail. And very soon, a large number of people at the lower end of the wage scale, because we know what the wages are at bars, restaurants, and retail, were out of a job. The governor at that point realized, in the middle of a pandemic, a health crisis, he didn't want any more homeless people on the street. And so very early on, he, through an executive order, imposed a moratorium on evictions. In other words, if rents weren't being paid, if mortgages weren't being paid, if utilities weren't being paid, landlords and others could not take action. There was a moratorium on evictions. He did not forgive the rent. And so we then realized we have a responsibility as state legislators, because if he wasn't forgiving the rent, this group of people at the low end of the wage scale, at the end of 3 months or 4 months, whatever, when the moratorium was lifted, would very quickly lose their homes. They would be evicted. And so we said, there's got to be a piece that we state legislators put in place to protect landlords and renters and homeowners. And so we crafted a bill that called for, initially we called it rental assistance, and the housing advocate said it's really mortgages too. So we changed the label to housing assistance. And we assumed at that time that we would put aside $100 million of state money, and we began to craft the parameters of the bill. One of the things we realized is we want to protect homeowners and renters, but we also have to protect landlords because they have bills to pay, and we wanted safe, secure housing for everyone. And so we set up the bill that the money would go directly to the landlords. We would in fact be paying the unpaid housing expenses. As luck would have it, in a divided legislature, Minnesota is the only state legislature that is divided, with Republicans in charge in the Senate and Democrats in the House. Though we passed it in the House, senators said, we won't support this funding until the governor gives up his executive powers. Well, the governor obviously was not going to do that in the middle of a pandemic. And so we, for a while, were having difficulty with this. Then the CARES Act passed in Washington, and we realized we could use some of that CARES Act money, the federal money, and the governor was able to allocate that through his executive powers. And so that's, so ultimately, we didn't have to pass the bill on the House floor or in the legislature, because he had the power to allocate $100 million from the CARES Act funding. That now is being administered through our Minnesota Housing, the state agency that has the responsibility for housing. And they are setting it up pretty much as we devised it in our bill, meaning they do pay the unpaid housing expenses directly. And they too don't do just rental assistance. They do for mortgages. I think we very quickly discovered how much need there was, because literally the program has only been set up 2 weeks. And in that time, we have had, I think, 12,000 applications so far. And of that 100 million, we already have a request for 25 million. So the need is great. The context here is that in the state of Minnesota, 1 in 5 people live in poverty. And that we know that obviously that income inequality leads also to housing instability. And that's the context in which we are dealing with this. We have help. We have a wonderful partnership. Before 2014, we weren't doing very well in state funding for housing. And 1 year we got nothing. And at the time I said to the housing advocates, you can't ever let this happen again. These are hundreds of groups around the state. And that group of advocates have helped us get to this point. So in the state of Minnesota, needs are great, but we have a start through the housing assistance and in a partnership with all of those housing advocates. Much work still to do. The needs are great, and nothing else in life goes well if you don't have a safe place to sleep at night. So that's our goal. This has been dispatches from the briefing. Thanks for joining us.